have David today, David Walters. He'll have a chance to introduce himself in a bit. But in the meantime, I want you to know that if you want to interact with us, if you have any comments, you can leave them on the chat, or you can also raise your hand. We can take your questions like that as well. No further introduction. David, over to you to hear a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I'm Dave Walters. I've spent the majority of my career in engineering, and then in recent times, more in the UX and product side of things. I guess as an overview, I'd say I lead teams to build impactful, user-centered technology products. I drive strategy and execution across AI, data science, and UX with a focus on transforming complex technical capabilities, whether that's AI-driven prediction, sophisticated machine learning pipelines, or just data-intensive platforms, and turning those into scalable, elegant solutions that deliver measurable results for our users and businesses.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. I don't know if it's me, but I couldn't, I mean, I hear your voice pretty low. Is it just me?
I can hear it fine.
Okay, then maybe it is. All right. Yeah. So, yes, Ajay, over to you if you want to start.
Yeah. No, thank you, Gabby. Thank you, David, for that introduction and background. Just curious, David, what led you to your current role and where you're at today with the software engineering and all that? Because if you look at where we're headed toward, it was like you almost picked the perfect field, right? Data, science, and user experience, right? We're all interested in learning that. And I think, you know, the last couple of years, it's really ramped up. So I'm just curious, what made you?
Yeah, I'd say initially a bit of luck, right? So I've always been into programming and building things ever since middle school, probably when I first learned how to code. I was obsessed with it. I think the idea of turning ideas into reality without having to do any physical labor is an extraordinary thing that we can do you know, in the 21st century. And I took that with me all the way to college. But because I had always done software engineering, I saw it more as a hobby instead of a career. So I actually went to art school at first, and I studied at the University of Arts and studied interaction design, right? So I started with UX because through building all these different things, I realized that there were so many things out there that were built that just were subpar in terms of actually using those things, right? Maybe they were technologically powerful, but they were clunky to use. So I wanted to fix that problem. And then as I learned more and more about it, I felt the other way, right? I was like, you know what? I'm really good at building things, and I think I can do a little bit of both. So I switched majors to computer science, graduated with a degree in computer science and mathematics, and then started my career as a software engineer. About 8 years into that, I came to the same original conclusion that I had, where it's like, you know, I'm building these cool things, but they're hard for people to use, especially in a business-to-business context, where UX is kind of seen as a luxury instead of, you know, table stakes, which is how I feel about it. So transitioned into user experience. I worked at Games 24/7, which is, at the time, they were about $2.7 billion company out of India, working on user engagement and marketing automation. And then I moved towards AI as I learned more about data science and the role that data-powered insights can play in really increasing autonomy of users and their experience with data-intensive applications.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So this is curious. I mean, you're spanning a bunch of different areas, right? I mean, you're trying to do that. Also, you're the creative director, I'll call it, right? So what does your typical day look like, you know, in your life, you know?
Yeah, so I always start with analytics. I love data and just getting insights from that data. So analyzing user workflows, understanding segments of users that we have within the application, speaking to them and reviewing feedback and bringing those insights into the product or to the product team for further research, working on prototypes that we can take back to those users to get some testing to validate or invalidate assumptions, working on pricing strategy, understanding the market in those dimensions. I set up a lot of dashboards for other departments when we do cross-departmental collaboration. One of the things that we'll talk about if we get into AI is how I think that everyone should be a data scientist at this point. So being able to take data from different systems using my engineering background to query APIs from Jira and from Salesforce and from various other places in the business to get all of the useful data together, clean it, process it, and then visualize it to share with other stakeholders is a big part of what I do.
And are you more customer facing or are you internal facing to the organization? What is where are you at with that strategically then?
A little bit of both. I do a lot of external things as far as going to customers, meeting with executives, understanding where their businesses are moving long term, and a lot of internal facing things as far as talking about product strategy, roadmap, getting key considerations from internal stakeholders as to what their departmental needs are from the products. So say support needs better ways to access debugging tools within the application stack, for example, where sales might need exciting new AI features because that's what all the prospects are asking about, that sort of thing.
Okay, got it. And, you know, there's always this talk about AI is going to take everybody's job away. And I'm just curious to get your spin on that. And you know, what is your opinion on that? And more importantly, how do we take AI today in what you're doing? Because data analytics, let's face it, that's the center of everything, right? Data analytics is, you know, I came from a data background as well, where we just backed up a lot of data in cybersecurity and we created data lakes. Problem with the data lakes is we couldn't do anything with it after a while. We just had this. So now fast forward, I think with the AI initiatives, the different types of technologies, hopefully that will give us some better, you know, utilization. So I'm just curious to understand your viewpoint on that.
Yeah, I think the first thing that we're going to see is just an increase in efficiency and productivity. I think that we already have 56% of CEOs report that Gen AI has increased efficiencies in employee time, according to PwC. Another one of their reports says that there's a 4.8% higher labor productivity growth in sectors that have been exposed to AI. But there is also, on the flip side of that, a 27% lower job growth in those same AI exposed occupations. So I think that the shift is really going to be in finding employees with high levels of agency rather than maybe the past paradigm of intelligence, which is interesting because there's a parallel there when you think about the progress of AI in the enterprise and how employees are seen in the enterprise. AI originally in the enterprise was centered around chatbots, right, and assistants, and you would just kind of use them for their intelligence. Where now we're moving towards agentic systems where we're using AI for its agency, right? The AI will get a task, it will plan that task, it will go retrieve the necessary resources to accomplish that task, and then in the process of accomplishing that task, it'll use various APIs and other things to take actions, right? And that's the same thing we need out of employees these days. Before, you might just hire someone because they're a really good thinker and you needed hard thought work. But now with kind of the democratization of some things like data science, because we have all these tools and empowerments because of AI, you really need people with agency who are just going to go out and execute and then get things done. I mean, thinking about UX, when we do UX research in the past, and you would have all these user interviews and transcripts to go through and data to clean up, that was a very time intensive task that took away from the time that you had available to actually use those insights and take them back to your product team. So what might have in the past taken a team of 5 researchers, you know, a couple of weeks to get through, you can now have one person with AI and a proper tool set get through all of that, tag it, do sentiment analysis, scoring, et cetera, and take that back to the team. So I feel like the shift towards individuals with a broader skill set is going to be the trend that we see. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you on that. I think that's going to be, matter of fact, within Cogent, we are doing an AI initiative. We actually have a lady yesterday, we spent 2.5 hours just brainstorming on what could we do internally and what would that look like. So, you know, obviously I do cybersecurity. In cybersecurity, it's another way to use that tool where we can, you know, do the low level, I'll call it analytical stuff that helps make the decision-making process much more effective, right? And then the question becomes at that point, right? Okay, how can we do this in real time? So I think one of the things you guys are probably doing is how to utilize that in your day-to-day, right? Real time, right? Taking that data, structuring it. Because let's face it, when we look at AI, it's not like we have a structured approach to it. We need it when we're thinking and we're going through it, the thought process. And I've used the different ones, and I've noticed that different platforms grab the data differently and they present it differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just curious on what your thoughts are on, hey, you've seen a lot of these platforms out there. What's your choice, or what do you prefer?
Oh man, that's a good question. I used a little bit of everything. I was a big fan of ChatGPT's products for a long time, but I think that betting on any foundation model at this point is a mistake. I agree with kind of the sentiment that it's becoming a commodity. Yesterday, Gemini 2.5 Pro came out, right? And it completely blows OpenAI's O1 out of the water, in my opinion. And it's free, right? So I pay $200 a month for my ChatGPT Plus or Pro or whatever subscription, and then Gemini drops, or Google drops the Gemini model for free to everyone, and it's just as good. So I think that kind of knowing the landscape of tools and being able to utilize the ones that are available to you effectively is a huge part of it. I love using Google AI Studio for various random tasks as well. Have you ever tried that?
I've never tried that one. No, I've seen it, but I've never used it yet. Yeah.
Got it. So it's kind of similar in the interface as the regular Gemini assistant, except for it has some really cool features, one of which is being able to share your screen in real time with the AI. So it kind of tackles that latency problem you were talking about. And
Yeah.
I used it successfully just the other day. I'm not a big Google Sheets person or an Excel person. I like to use Jupyter Notebooks for all my data analysis, but I needed to get something into a sheet to share with a colleague. And I just couldn't find the button to change some date format or something like that. So I shared my screen with Gemini, and then I just asked, because it activates your microphone, activates your screen share, and it can see and hear you in real time. So I just asked the AI assistant, where do I go for this feature? And it led me up to the toolbar, and I clicked, and then I said, okay, where now? Gave me an option that wasn't on the screen, so a slight hallucination. I just gave the feedback that I can't see the option that you're looking for. It took another look, corrected itself, and then I got there, within minutes, and was able to complete my task.
Is that like a learning mode? Is that what that is then? It's giving you a learning, because some of the AI tools don't have learning modes built into them, right? So you're constantly refining that. And it sounds like that's a better, product set where it's actually.
What's interesting is that AI Studio kind of just exists as a playground. So you can utilize it however you want. I think as a learning tool is a great application for it. That's what I've used it for. I think that it could also be, maybe in the future with some improvements, really useful for usability testing, right? So I found it useful because it's pre-trained on, all the data of the internet and all the things that it's seen, which makes it really good at helping you through common applications, right? It's seen a ton of data related to that. So getting through Excel or Google Sheets, not a problem. But when it comes to taking on a completely new user interface, how would that same AI do? And I think that over time, with some improvements to this, let's call it learning model of being able to screen share and interact in real time, you'd be able to do good usability testing, or at least preliminary usability testing with an AI assistant to maybe get rid of some of your assumptions out of the gate. And I think that would be really cool.
Got it. So I would be interested in, maybe you could give us a time when, you sound like you've done a lot of solution approaches, right, to customers. Can you give us like an example when a client was, needed something, and, and you were going to actually influence the feature of that product, and sort of do that, just like a use case study, so to speak.
Yeah, so thinking of one of the projects that I worked on for a contractor that was building AI systems for the Department of Defense, it was actually kind of in your realm, in cybersecurity. What we're doing is we're using AI to predict data center outages before they would happen by estimating kind of the timing and criticality of failures in the infrastructure using all sorts of different data sources, right? So we had sensor data coming from IoT devices, we had satellite data, we had the general network data, so like your bit rates and your loss. and all of that. And then we combined that with text logs from all of the applications in the application stack. And we used that to correlate back to what we would call an incident score, which would say, given all of the information that we're ingesting in real time from your system, here are the things that we think that you need to know about. And that was really tackling the problem that you referenced with the data lake, where once you have so much data, you kind of have an obscurity problem where it's, I have so much, I don't know what to look at. It's hard to tell what's important, right? So what we were trying to do was pull out key insights and then correlate them by time or by sector or network segment or what have you, to correlate them together to say, hey, these things are related. And because they're related and they're all some level of bad, this is something the user should know about. Versus
so you guys normalized that data, really. You normalized it to be able to utilize, right?
Exactly.
Because typically that stuff is probably painstaking, right? Because you have a lot of different anomalies, false positives, those, because I've been in that situation and I literally would look at that stuff and shake my head, well, which is real, which is not real. And you almost have to create a quantitative methodology, right? So, and it's difficult. Some of these data lakes, like you said, the variables between them and how much, it's just astronomical. I've seen it. I worked for the Department of Defense. I worked for the Pentagon for 3 years. And so I got to see some crazy data lakes. The government's notorious for hoarding data, right? Yes. And I remember they presented it to me and I'm looking at this thing. And to your point, it was, if I had some kind of an AI platform, I think it would have been much easier. This is back in 2012, and really people weren't really utilizing that. So it's kind of interesting on those projects. One of the things I always find, when people start talking about AI, user interface, what are some of the challenges or some of the things that you do to kind of help bridge that, right? Because it's such a wide use case today, right? So when you're sitting with that client, can you explain us a little bit about what your methodology is that you would use specifically?
Yeah, the first thing I always work with the client is, do we need AI for this? I think that's the most important question to ask, because especially with AI just in the air, when people think of it, they immediately apply it as the solution to whatever problem is at hand, whether it fits or not. This is something that we went through with the DoD in that project, is they wanted to just, can we use AI for this? Can we use AI for this? And sometimes, especially when you're dealing with that latency problem, having simpler statistical models that can accomplish the same task with far lower latency might be the right way to go, right? And with those more simple models, you also avoid the black box problem, right? So if I can show you via a clustering algorithm or a decision tree why the system made a certain determination or decision, it's easier to trust, right? Because you can see, okay, I followed it through its logic. I agree with its logic and how it got there. But when you're doing something with a black box, like a neural network, there's so many layers that you can't see. You just have to trust the output. And that's a really hard thing for people to do, right? Especially in areas where they have domain expertise. So something like cybersecurity, perhaps, right? It's like, okay, well, why did the AI flag this as critical? I don't think it's a big deal, right? How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, no, that's a good
have
point.
A question. Yeah, sorry, Ajay. I have a question regarding workflows, because modern workflows are becoming more fluid and personalized, right? Yet, I think many organizations still rely on rigid legacy systems. So in your experience, what are some practical first steps that teams and companies can take to transition from outdated workflows to more adaptive AI supported ones?
I'd say the first thing is definitely start small with something that you think is a good candidate. And by small, it doesn't mean small impact. It just means small in scope, right? Don't try to redo all of your workflows at once to make them AI powered, but pick one area where you see significant advantage to increases in efficiency on problems that have fuzzy steps to their solution. And by fuzzy steps, I mean, if you think of some use case like ingesting files, 10 years ago, if you wanted to upload a spreadsheet of contacts to your CRM, you would have to have a CSV with all of the columns and rows in those columns correctly formatted. The header needs to match. The parsing system isn't going to be able to do it, right? Now with computer vision and all the other tools that we have at our disposal, you can send any type of file into the ingestion system to be parsed. That can be a PDF, it could be a JPEG image that you took on your phone of the thing that you want to scan, etc. And that can reduce a lot of error rates. It can reduce a lot of frustration for users, things of that nature. And it's relatively low risk, right? But it's an application that you can then scale across many parts of your workflow, right? Because data ingestion is an important part of a lot of different workflows. So if you start with something that is relatively small but can have a big impact, I think it's probably the best way to go.
Definitely, I agree. And I want to go back to UX because we haven't had many speakers on that area. And I wanted to ask you, tools like Figma or Visily or any AI, enhanced UX platform are helping even like non-designers to prototype ideas quickly, right? So how is the democratization of UX tools shifting the balance between designers, engineers, and business teams?
That's a good question. I think that the biggest impact that's had is just speeding up 0 to 1, right? If you have a new idea and you want to take it from concept to launch, this is the best time in history to do it, right? With tools like Cursor and Windsurf and Lovable and all the other kind of AI product tools, you can really just throw your ideas out there, get some decently generated content back in the form of a UI, right, that you can click through and test, and then proceed through the product development lifecycle that way. I think that also scares a lot of people because they feel like maybe their expertise isn't as well valued, but I disagree, right? Because a lot of the brainstorming process is validating or invalidating assumptions anyway, and that design, if the assumptions are wrong, already goes away, right? The value is in the later stages, the iteration, the perfection of the experience, the empathy that's shown when you talk to users and get their feedback about how things are. So I think that being able to accelerate the lower value parts of the job, right, is good for everyone. And that goes with engineering too. You know, we mentioned like Cursor and kind of the vibe coding phenomenon. Having AI that's able to write your unit tests for you and make simple CSS adjustments without you having to hunt down things in the code is super valuable, right? And the value of software engineering isn't in the physical act of fingers on the keyboard typing code, right? Hopefully no one's really typing a ton of code anymore with Copilot and all the fancy autocompletes and agents that we have inside the IDEs. But that's not where the value lies, right? The value is in being able to design robust systems that are fault tolerant, that scale well, that can be distributed, that can run, large loads for diverse sets of users and things like that. So AI is definitely changing the way that we work and interact, but I think that it's in positive ways that allow us to do the parts that we value in a job a lot more effectively.
Right. And for example, how do you see UX evolving beyond screens? Like, how does that impact how we design workflows right now in the era of AI?
Yeah, I'm super excited about that actually, because I feel like UX has been stagnant for a while around designing web apps, right? I feel like everything's been a web app for about 10 years. And when ChatGPT's advanced voice mode first came out, it was like, how am I going to use this, or how useful is this, and why is it better than working with text? But it's kind of like having a really smart friend around that you can just ask things all the time, right? And you don't need a keyboard for that. You can just speak. And with things like Google AI Studio's screen sharing, which also uses voice mode and these other modalities, it's going to be a really interesting time to see what form applications take in the future. When you look at things like Oculus, or I guess Meta's now working on those Ray-Ban glasses that are going to be a part of your everyday, and you think about the kind of interfaces that you could have overlaying your daily life with an AI assistant built in. It can remember your shopping list while you're at the store, or give you recipe examples as you're looking at ingredients, right? Like the chance or the possibilities for transformation of our everyday life are huge. And I think that the experience of being a human with these assistive technologies is going to be fundamentally different in incredible ways.
It's interesting you say those glasses. I actually bought for Christmas my son one. I didn't know what they were, right? So I bought those. I put it on, And, he's typical 15-year-old. He goes, Dad, we can do so much more and I can make so many decisions. He's selling me on this thing, right? And I put it on. I didn't even know really what to do with it, but I could see how what you were saying is so true. You know what I mean? It's like having an assistant with you 7/24 forever, right? And I think that's a good thing. You know what I mean? I just get worried sometimes that we start living in a virtual world, and that was my whole thing with him. Don't live in a
Yeah,
virtual world. You know what I'm saying? You still need to interact because we can never replace the interactions that we have as humans, right?
agreed.
So sometimes that's a scary thought, right?
Yeah,
So,
I'm a
but,
big fan of the idea of augmented realities instead of virtual reality.
right.
Virtual reality, just like the metaverse, and you're just in it and you never interact with the physical world. I find that a hard future to stomach personally, but I do love the
Yeah.
idea of augmented reality because I took a trip to Paris recently and I don't speak French, right? And we were in a pretty rural part outside of Paris, and all the street signs were in French. Everyone spoke French, and I was worried, right? But luckily, I had my phone, as we all do, and Google Maps Street View, if you hold it up, will overlay on top of reality arrows that will just point you to your destination, right? So if you're trying to get to a cafe, I put in the cafe's address. It showed me the route on the street. I don't know the streets. There's a little button you can hit and hold your phone up, and then it'll show through your camera the world with giant arrows pointing you down the street.
Wow.
So we walked all the way down the street, took us right to the cafe, got in there, didn't know how to speak French, used the live translation feature. We got far enough to get an English speaking waiter. That was very nice of them. And then when we sat down, we got a menu all in French. Couldn't read it. Google Translate also has a feature where you can use your camera and it'll live translate whatever you're pointing
Right.
at. So right next to all of the menu items, I got them in English and I ordered something that I would recognize, which was nice. So
That's a great story. Actually, I'll have to do that next time because I was in India last year and it's similar story, right? I don't know where I'm going, right? Everything's in Hindi and it's also in English too, but you look at the menu and some of the menus are different, right? And I'm a native Indian, but I just never really learned it. So when I was traveling, that Google, I was using the translation feature, like you said, and that actually helped out quite a bit too. But yeah, thank God we have those things. Hey, I'm curious about the other piece of it is the NLP, right? So how is that helping you enable, the technologies with the NLP, right? Because you said, hey, we can use that now with the different AI platforms. How's that work then?
yeah, that's been really powerful in a number of ways. I think one is just allowing users to have a new way to interact with products. I think the proliferation of no code or low code tools is kind of proof of that, right? Like when we talked about data analysis before, you would have to know Python and you would have to know Jupyter notebooks and you would need to know Matplotlib and you would need to know all these other tools to make it happen inside your code. Where now, if you just know those words that I just used and you have access to something like ChatGPT, you can just say, hey, ChatGPT, I'm trying to make, some sort of bar chart to show revenue for the quarter, and here's my CSV, help me do it. And it'll give you all of that output, right? So when it comes to things like search, you might have platforms with complicated query languages like Jira's JQL, right? If I want to get some subset of data from my Jira project, but I don't know the syntax, it's going to be a struggle. I'd have to look up documentation. Stack Overflow used to be a dependable source for those sorts of things. But now with Atlassian AI, you can just use natural language and explain, this is what I'm looking for on this project, and it'll return that query. And then we can kind of scale that idea to so many different inputs and really empower users to get the information that they need without obscure technical knowledge requirements.
Got it. So on these other other interesting things with the chat box, chat box and the virtual assistants. Do you see that evolving even, better than it is right now? Because the problem with the chatbot sometimes is I'm always repeating myself, trying to, and it just sometimes those things don't work. You know what I mean? So how do you, especially with customer support, those kinds of applications, and I can't get a real person, and it puts me into this loop. And that seems to be, is that something you guys experience? And I'm like, okay, what is there a solution for that, I guess?
Yeah, the first chatbots were kind of just wrappers on ChatGPT, and then
Right.
we started to include RAG into the equation, right? Retrieval augmented generation, which is essentially just being able to ground the responses of the chatbot in truth from some data source, right? So maybe that's access to your database. And we could use that to inform the responses to get higher levels of accuracy. The problem with that is that you need to know kind of the corpus of information that you need to query ahead of time before people ask things. So if somebody asked a question that was a little bit out of scope, you wouldn't have a good answer for that, and you need to kind of mitigate against hallucinations and things of that nature, where now we're really moving away from that chatbot and RAG pattern to more of an agentic pattern, right? So then dynamically, when a user asks a question, the agent platform will use that context to decide what data source it needs to go to retrieve further information, right? So
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then with
Lot
that better context, it also, we have thinking models now like Gemini 2.5 Pro and O1 from ChatGPT or from OpenAI that are really good at planning tasks, right? So now you ask a question, it plans the tasks, which includes going to the right data source, gets that data, brings it back, and then it can do further actions on that data, right? So if that wasn't a one-to-one match, maybe it can do additional lookups and join it together, do some calculations, query a third API, or maybe make modifications to a system, and then bring all that back to the user. So the chatbots just being able to give you information was kind of the first step, but now the chatbots being able to, shouldn't call them a chatbot, that's rude. The agent platforms being able to take actions on your behalf, cancel a subscription, buy a product for you, et cetera, is really taking it to a whole new level. So accuracy has increased, but so has usefulness exponentially, I think, with these things.
Yeah. All right, good. The other thing is I noticed, let's talk about it. Everybody says, you've got all these intrusive type technologies. What about data privacy? As an individual, right? It seems to be coming up more and more of, hey, I'm throwing all this data out there. What's happening with it? Where's it going? Right? Because we have no idea. It just sits there and generates. To your point, one of the things in cybersecurity, that's another concern is that data, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once I start producing these things, where does that live and who's got access to it and who can see it, So just curious on your viewpoint.
It's a big one. I mean, I'm a big fan of all the data possible, right? Because as a builder of these systems, it's incredibly useful to have access to everything that you possibly can. But it's a big thing in the enterprise. I'm currently working in the logistics industry. Everyone feels that their workflows and their data is a part of their secret sauce, and nobody wants to share, right? So that makes kind of generalizing best practices and optimizing for everyone a really hard challenge. And I understand people's concerns, right? And you have to give them that privacy and silo that data. And then, we're working at CXT. We're one of the few SOC 2 compliant organizations in the logistics industry. So we take that very seriously. And it makes it hard to do some things like advanced route optimization and some other things because you can't learn from the other companies. But what you can do is with access to these systems is just look for patterns and try to scale those. You can't train on the data directly or access it in any way, but it can still be useful, but you got to be careful.
Right. Yeah. One of the things comes up, and again with cybersecurity, is that like you said, IP, intellectual property, right? How do you safeguard your intellectual property, right? We deal with a lot of people that have specific patents, specific ways that they do things, and that's how they make their living, right? If we throw it out there in AI, the concern is how do we lock it down where it doesn't get disseminated and somebody, maybe a third world country or something, starts using that for their own words, right? There's an interesting story. This is a true story. So the war class submarine, it's called, a friend of mine works for the Department of Defense Contractors. It's called the Virginia class sub. We only have one. It's taken us 5 years. China, and this is a true story, because of the technologies they've got, they will be mass producing 100 this year. Now, if you look at the material, bills of material and everything, guess what? It's almost identical to the Virginia class sub, actually. So again, we get this information, we get this IP stuff, it's taken over, and some of these countries utilize that to leapfrog their technologies and stuff like that. So that becomes a scary thought, right? Well, how can they get 100 and we can only produce one? And then these are real life cases, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So in those sensitive areas, I think we all have to realize that there's some, fence that has to put around that so we don't lose that, right? Otherwise, you weaponize AI in effect, right?
Yeah.
And so I was just throwing that out there because he was explaining me this stuff and it was fascinating, and I think today's political climate is one of those ones that we're falling behind. How does the United States compete competitively, right? And, how can we take information and data and become, better in terms of competitiveness? And that was the other thing too. I'm sure you work with companies and they want that competitive edge. How do you handle that? What would you say to somebody, even coach in our company, right? We're always looking for that. What are some of your best practices in using AI and data around that?
Well, so best practices, one of the things just kind of still on the topic of kind of data privacy that people don't think about is that the explosion of data is real, right? Like we are creating more data now than ever before. Every click, every search, every time you upload a photo or try a new tool or pick a different song on streaming, like you're generating data that's going to a company to learn and to profile you, right? And that's a hard thing to protect against because people don't think about all of those interactions. It's an obvious thing to not take all of your company documents and post them into DeepSeek, right? Because that's a foreign state actor with a free tool, and everyone knows free isn't free. Usually it's your data that they're monetizing, right? And that's an obvious one, but people don't think about, their Google search history or their Facebook search history. I remember one of the things that we learned about early in class for a lot of these things was that AOL, when they went out of business, they released all of their search history, anonymized, of course, because you have to anonymize it. You can't just say what people were looking at. However, the things that people tend to look at most of the time will tell you who they are. A lot of people Google themselves. A lot of people Google things around them, like restaurants, right? Search for things that are relevant to them, their shopping habits, etc. And with enough data, like in the case of AOL, you could identify most of the people in that data set, right? They search for their friends, they search for their families, they search for the schools that they go to, etc. So even though someone may not have posted all of their information online, they may have indirectly, right? So you just have to really be careful about the things that you do online and where your data is going and how you're generating data, if that's something that you really care about, especially in the corporate world, right? Because often we're solving business problems. So we're searching for, hey, how do I build this type of system? What if I have this data, right? And now we're using AI tools for that, which most of them state pretty clearly when and when they're not training on that, but that wasn't always the case. And it isn't the case for some of the newer tools like DeepSeek, which have a automatically have you opted in.
Right. Yeah, I was actually talking with a data privacy person that does yesterday. We had a little kind of get together, and he was explaining me some of the stuff with the AI in the chats and stuff like that. And it's interesting because I think it's just going to create more, more awareness to this stuff, right? Like you said,
Yeah.
um, I think that's just the nature of it. The other issue becomes, when you're inadvertently doing these things, and I'll go back, like even TikTok, that's all generating data as well, right? So people are
Mhm.
using AI with TikTok now, and the challenge becomes it's getting to a point where, how do you determine what's real and what's not real? Because
Mm.
AI can give you that data sets, right? That you can make anything look like you. Or for example, I saw one of the commercials where they had President Trump on. The guy looked just like President Trump. Matter of fact, what he was saying and talking was paraphrased of those kinds of things. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
it was like, wow, it's kind of scary if you think about it from one point, right? And I always was curious at what's that? How does it leaves me vulnerable at this point, and how can I protect myself against that, right? In an AI environment, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's becoming really hard. I mean, even with just verifying the source of information and cross-referencing it, that gets tricky too, because you have other
Right.
sources that look legitimate that might just be AI generated. And I think that probably the best way to protect yourself from that right now is just understanding the current state of AI capabilities, right? Like if you aren't paying close attention to advances with Midjourney or other image or video generation tools, you might not know how good they are and be far more susceptible to those things. If you look at AI generated video 5 years ago, it was this crazy morphing, weird things were
Right.
melting type of thing, right? And
Yeah.
now we have super realistic, you can insert whoever you want into a scene type of
Yeah.
AI. And if you haven't been paying attention for the last couple of years, you might think, oh, I can definitely distinguish AI from reality, right? AI has all these tells, there's always 6 fingers and then 4 and then 2 because AI used to be really bad with fingers and things like that. But now it's very consistent, right? Frame to
Yeah.
frame. There are far less unnatural visual artifacts and improbable scenarios, and they're the videos aren't as overly polished as they used to be. One thing we would talk about is kind of the AI sheen over top of everything, right? Nobody ever had a wrinkle or a pimple or anything like that, but it's gotten a lot better. So it definitely requires a lot of critical thinking these days to kind of differentiate. And I think it's just super important to stay on top of the capabilities.
Well, it's funny because I have my friends that go on these dating sites, and I said, I think that's all AI generated. They're like, you think so? I said, yeah, that looks too perfect. Because you
Mhm.
look at these people, and it's like, wow, that's a perfect human being. You know what I mean? In all jest, right? So I thought that was kind of funny. So as we get older, maybe we can repolish our wrinkles and everything. We don't have to worry about going to a plastic surgeon. We just do it ourselves, right? And
Yeah.
post it up. So,
Yeah. Hey, that's a real thing to look
yeah,
out for, though. I mean, AI dating scams are actually growing in popularity, with generative
yeah,
AI
that and
creating those.
the crypto is getting bad too now. The
Mm,
crypto is, I don't know how many times a week I get a crypto fake. It's like almost like what do they call those things? Like a data sheet, and it says, "Oh, look,
mm,
if you do this," and it's getting hard because it looks like it's a source coming from somewhere.
right.
So if you're doing like forex exchange trading, which is currency, or if you're looking at the cryptos, normal people, I don't know if they would really get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's you know, which just is another thing that we have to watch out for. So I think we're almost coming down to 10 minutes. I wanted to open it up. Is there any questions for anybody? I mean, I think this is a
I
great subject.
I do
Those kinds of
want
things.
to ask
Go ahead,
a
Kate.
few things. David, so for the past, 50 minutes, we have heard you talking about all the different areas that you like, and you have worn obviously multiple hats. So I have out of curiosity, have you had a moment where all of your identities collide to create something amazing, unexpected, or game changing?
I hope so. I do see that as kind of my superpower is being at that intersection of technology and design and engineering and things like that. I think that a lot of that is being brought to the new company that I joined, CXT. We're going to be changing the way that we look at logistics technology. I'm super excited for that because some of the problems in logistics from a mathematical modeling perspective, so things like vehicle routing problems, which is similar to the traveling salesman problem, right? Where you're trying to find the best path or the least cost path with some set of constraints to get some orders delivered, et cetera. These were originally like the hello world problems of data science and optimization and statistical learning. So being able to tackle those problems with the latest technologies that we have and being able to use distributed systems to get multiple good candidates for a problem and being able to solve. So something like a VRP is mathematically intractable as you add more stops to it, right? Because it's an exponential amount of solutions that are possible. So being able to add heuristics and things into the model to get within 1% of an optimal answer in far less time than it would actually take to search that entire possible solution space is super exciting to me. And being able to use my background in UX and mathematics to bring that to users in a way that they can really connect with and use easily without having to know the math or having to understand, linear programming or different ways of solving that problem is super exciting to me. And I think that's my next mountain.
Great. And also I checked, when we met weeks ago, that your bio mentions crafting like with elegance and precision. So have you ever worked on something that wasn't elegant, but taught you something that you still carry on with you, something valuable?
I've worked on many things that were not elegant, absolutely. I think that when we were working on that DoD project that I talked about when I first arrived, they hadn't done any UX. It was very much a tool built by engineers for other tech professionals. And it was kind of similar to Grafana, right? There was just a bunch of graphs and charts and numbers and tables everywhere. And that's how people were used to seeing things. So that's how they were okay interacting with it. Right. But once we introduced that product to new sets of users who were maybe less technical but had similar needs, it was a struggle. So being able to work with them on how they best understand that type of data or approach that type of data led us to being able to reduce the amount of UI elements that were on screen to something that was more simple, that was more manageable, and that had progressive discovery built in, right? So if you needed more information, you could go deeper and deeper and deeper to uncover everything, even to the individual log line level, if you wanted to, instead of just everything everywhere all at once, like the movie title.
Definitely. And then one of the questions that I always want to know is, what can we do if we want to follow a similar path, the path that you took?
I'd say be curious and be creative. I think those are the two best skills to have in this day and age, is just going out there and finding ways to do stuff that you want to do that you're interested in, right? I started with math and computer science. I moved to design. I moved back again. I think it's the right way to go about things, right? The idea of continuous learning used to be a nice to have when you were doing things, but now with the accessibility of all of the different tools and ways that you can improve yourself or augment your skill set with AI, just the drive to want to do that is key. And I think that's what's been kind of key to my success, is just going out there and solving hard problems however you can, and then just building on that.
Right. And are there any resources that we can take from you that you always look at?
Resources for what in particular?
AI, UX, like related to your areas.
Okay, yeah. So for AI stuff, I'm always looking at what all the top AI studios are doing, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, paying attention to them on X, checking their blogs. Google Research posts a lot of what they're doing out in the open. So does Amazon, actually, especially in the world of logistics. They post high level how they're solving these different challenges in predicting orders, pre-staging warehouses, optimizing routes, things like that. Generally, when it comes to kind of academic problems, people and companies are very open about how they're exploring those solutions. So I just check out what they're doing. For design leadership, I look to Nielsen Norman Group. IDEO always has great thoughts on design. And I also pay a lot of attention to what the consulting firms are doing, right? Because they're working with all these different businesses. So PwC's reports, Deloitte, McKinsey, Accenture. I always take a look at what they're seeing in enterprises because they have such a broad reach and variety, in these interactions. So I find all of those sources extremely useful.
Thank you so much. Okay, yes, I think we are about to wrap this session up. Any closing comments from anyone, Ajay or yourself, David?
Ajay, you want to go first?
Yeah, listen, this has been great. I love the the way you explain it, and it sounds like you're in a perfect spot where you're bringing a lot of innovation together in a technical field, right? I'm also a math major. That was my minor, was mathematics.
Nice.
Unfortunately, I got out of the technology industry and went more into sales and marketing because I enjoyed more of that, more solution stuff. And so, but I kind of, tinker still with the technology stuff. So yeah, thank you for the incredible insight. Appreciate it. Hopefully I'll be back on at a future date.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great talking to you and talking about some of these topics and uncovering some insights. I think that, I guess in closing, I'd say that in a world that's increasingly shaped by AI, just make sure that you're approaching everything with a little bit of curiosity and a healthy dose of skepticism, right? I think that AI has this immense potential to enhance a lot of aspects of our lives, like we talked about, with being able to see directions and translations and things in real time. But it also has these new risks like scams, the dating scams we talked about, privacy concerns, et cetera. So I just encourage everybody to stay informed, right? Verify sources, think critically, and just make sure you're always learning about how this world's changing, because with AI, it's changing faster than ever. So it's more important than ever.
Definitely.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, David, for your time and participation in this podcast. We'll keep in touch for sure. Thank you so much once again. And thank you everyone that joined us today. We'll see you again next Thursday.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Take care.